Good morning, everyone. You're at Forums That Matter, which is a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I'm Ken Fries, and I'm the coordinator today for this forum. And our discussion will be both in-house, live, and in person as well as our topic is the Fifth Estate, the press in the 21st century. We'd like everyone to know that Q&A will start about 9:30, and it will be, and Marlene will provide a mic. We ask that our visual audience put our questions in the Q&A box on Zoom. Please shut off your phones for people here or put them in an airplane mode. This program will be recorded and it will be available at our site, uucleveland.org. So it's my pleasure to introduce our guest. We originally had two guests scheduled. Phil could not make it today, and Mark graciously is filling in for another member of Signal Cleveland. Okay. Mark is the managing editor of news at Signal Cleveland. He's a veteran journalist with experience in alternate media, print, digital, television news, and for 19 years, he was a reporter with the as a Metro columnist with the Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. Most recently, Mark spent 3 years at investigative enterprise and breaking news reporter at WKYC TV, where he ran a series called Leading the Land. And it had to do with the mayoral primary race of Cleveland in 2021. For this, he won a regional Emmy Award. So, Mark, thank you for coming.
All right. Thank you for having me, and I apologize for getting on the tail end of a cold, so my voice is still a little raspy, but I assure you I am not contagious, because my wife has isolated me for a week. I think she'd like to see that go on even longer. I am filling in today for our editor-in-chief, Lila Mills, who's didn't realize that her daughter attends Columbia University was the parents' weekend, so these two collided. So she's there, and I'm happy to come out and speak about Signal Cleveland. We are a new newsroom in Cleveland, and I'll talk a bit about why and how we're different. But we are a nonprofit. That's probably the biggest difference. We have a tagline that is news for people, not for profit. But I think to set that up and talk a little bit about why there's a need for it and how we fit into the space, I would take you through my trajectory as a reporter, because I seem to always go to all the media just as it's managing for the decline. And I've kind of come through and landed here, and all of it seems to make sense. I will also talk a bit about the Marshall Project, which is a nonpartisan nonprofit national organization that has a recently launched a version of a newsroom here. They focus specifically on criminal justice issues. They also have a relationship with Signal Cleveland by partnering on some of the content that we do, and we'll explain that. As Ken mentioned in the beginning, I've been in Cleveland for 30 years as a reporter. I started actually in public relations when I got out of college because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I did the next best thing, which was become a bartender so that I could become a writer. And I started in the alternative news media. So in the early 1990s, you probably have heard of the Village Voice. That was maybe the biggest known alternative newspaper. But there were chains across the country. And in the 90s, it was the heyday. They made a lot of money with those, ads, the sex ads in the back, the classified ads, the ads for, shows at local bars. That was the bread and butter of it. And they were profitable. Part of the way they were profitable was they wanted young reporters who would get paid by the word, not the dollar. They wanted you young and eventually to move on because the economic structure was not there, to make this a long time career. I worked for the Cleveland Free Times, which eventually was purchased by the Village Voice. So this was the beginning of a consolidation of media. Then I moved to Philadelphia and worked for another chain, and then another chain bought the Cleveland Scene, which at one time was a dedicated music-focused alternative paper that came out weekly, was distributed in the bars. And all of this started to consolidate because largely of one thing, Craigslist. Craigslist is often not given the credit it deserves for having taken down legacy media, because they did take a lot of the classified ads, which, as you know, on Craigslist were free. And that really did chip away at even the major daily newspapers, which made a lot of money on that small agate type that you would find selling your house, your boat, your motorcycle, all of that. So after jumping around at alternative newspapers as they were consolidating, I wound back up in Cleveland, working for Cleveland Scene after it had been purchased by a much larger, newsier alternative newspaper chain. And then I jumped over to the Plain Dealer, which was a big deal because it not only, I think, doubled my salary, but also opened, it was in 2000 when I got there, and that was very much at the beginning of sort of the internet. The Plain Dealer had just spent $50 million on a new printing plant and headquarters, so clearly they were still seeing themselves as the future, which may have been the short-sightedness of what was about to come. I started in the Lorraine Bureau. Plain Dealer at the time that I started, for perspective, had nearly 400 reporters, editors, librarians, clerks. That's the editorial staff, which put us, in the top 15 to 20 newspapers in the country. We had bureaus in Washington with 6+ people, Columbus, and then all the local bureaus. They covered Persian Gulf War I, sent reporters there. They were it was a big operation. I was there for 19 years, 13 of those specifically with the print product, which, as you know, only comes out now 3 or 4 days a week. And then I spent my last 6 years specifically with Cleveland.com as it began to move into that pure digital side. When I left there in 2019, .com maybe, and the Plain Dealer total, maybe 60 some reporters, editors left, from nearly 400 to 60. So just so you can get a sense of that decline. Obviously the internet took hold in that 19 years that I was there, beyond just the Craigslist. And just the ability to market directly to an individual is just so powerful. There was no need for those big ads. Back in the day, you would open the Sunday paper and you'd see your National City Bank, whatever happened to them, right? All those full page ads, all that stuff disappeared. I left to go to television, which also on a decline. That's a very shrinking pie. There's still an audience there, but it's getting smaller and smaller, and they still do make money, but same problem. Their resources are getting smaller and smaller. There's less dedication to reporting because reporting is expensive. Having reporters spend time on a story is expensive. It's way easier to just have you do smaller stories, aggregation, just repeat what was done earlier. And that is kind of the model. I'm still a contributor at Channel 3. I do try to go on a couple times a month with maybe either stories that we've done at Signal Cleveland, but mostly to add just larger context to stories because I have the ability to spend more time on stories where I am now. But TV was struggling as well. And it was almost 3 years ago that there was an effort quietly being made in Cleveland, led by the Cleveland Foundation, to take a look at where people in Cleveland get their news and how they might fill that. After they studied it, they interviewed basically news leaders at almost every outlet in town, as well as talking to real Clevelanders. They found that there was a hole in the donut of coverage. That hole was the city of Cleveland. Cleveland residents weren't being listened to. There weren't articles being geared towards their needs. And that's where the Cleveland Foundation decided to kind of focus their attention to see if they could fill that space. They partnered with the American Journalism Project, which is a national nonprofit that's essentially acts as a venture capitalist, fund to raise money to help support local media coverage, usually through the nonprofit model. So they came together and recruited a handful of people to try to launch Signal Cleveland. And we did launch, our first article was published November 15th of last year, so we're not even a year old. We started maybe a year and a half ago in terms of organizing. We had no office space. We had nothing to point to. It was difficult, as you can imagine, to recruit people to come join us. What do you have? Well, nothing, but hang in there. We will get there. Around the same time, the Marshall Project, which is a national nonprofit newsroom that focuses on criminal justice, was also launching in Cleveland with support from the Gun Foundation. They're taking a look very specifically at criminal justice reform issues. They focus on the effects, for example, of some of the stories they've done. Bail reform, taking a look at the impact. There has been a real need to lessen the cost that it takes to get out of jail while waiting for your trial, because it generally kept poor people in because they just didn't have the ability. They've studied that. They've looked recently at the impact of Ohio laws on people who have lost their driver's license and how that becomes a huge barrier to getting work, to job, and it just leads to a cascade of more legal trouble for generally people that are poor. They did a story recently about driving while black in Bracknell that took a look at all the ticketing going on in the city of Bracknell and how that skewed towards black drivers coming through. So I think you can see through their stories very clearly where they're focused. We do run their content on Signal Cleveland, but we're very different. I'll take a minute to talk a bit about it, and then I'll show you some examples if I'm able to pull off the screen sharing. Signal Cleveland is unique in a couple of ways. The first is that we are built around Cleveland documenters. Those are people in Cleveland that we pay, that are non-journalists, that we train and pay to go cover public meetings. They also sometimes will use social media at the public meeting, but largely they're taking notes. The notes get cleaned up and vetted, cataloged, and put online for anybody that wants to see them. And they're trying to go to meetings that most people are ignoring. We pay them now $18 an hour to do so. We've trained 500 plus documenters with a core group of 50 or 60 that are working fairly regularly, people trying to get the opportunity to do these meetings. That's city council safety meetings to, those board of zoning appeals. The range is huge, and you can find all of that both on our site and documenters.org. So to have that is kind of a set of eyes and ears in the community that no news organization really had. Again, they're not reporters, but we take that information, and if we're not at that meeting, we're reading those notes to see if there is a story there that we can connect. We also publish a lot of the notes online, just as we will pull out interesting elements that we think are relevant to the Clevelanders. The documenters, also because it's a network, many of them, most of them from Cleveland, are actually, again, eyes and ears. We seek their feedback, their input on stories. It's, let's be honest, I came from newsrooms that were led by white males. And that does have an inherent bias in it. To be able to be more open and listen more to the community does shape some of the coverage. We have a team of reporters that cover economics, health, K through 12, higher ed, and criminal justice and city hall government. We also rely on them at times to use their expertise to actually inform and tell the community what they should be paying attention to. But it's much more of a relationship than in my many years as I laid out an alternative, big daily television, in digital news. We are trying to listen more to the community. That was what this was built around. That was supposed to be the model. And I think we're successful so far at achieving that. And I'll pull up our website so you can see it. The interesting thing about websites, most people do not come to the website. This is the case at television, especially digitally. Most people are obviously reading it through their phone, so they're not on a laptop. Most of it's coming through links people are sharing. No one's really landing on the homepage. Most of it will be through Google search. Our number one story right now continues to be what the hell is issue 1 from the August issue 1, not the current issue 1, because we can tell what people are searching and how they're landing. But that is the reality of the way people are getting their news. It's because they're searching for something, they're seeing it out there, and then they're clicking a link and coming to it. So the websites are important, but they're not how people really interact with news anymore. People share stuff, and we can get more into that with questions, hopefully, because there was a real shift in around 2006. I was covering I'm on a tangent here. I think the governor's race, I can't remember what year. It was after '04, so it must have been the governor's race the following year. Was the first time, I think John Kasich was running, became governor, where they began to literally just ignore the media. We don't need you anymore. We're going to make our announcements directly to the people that want to follow us, right? That's when they began to use more of a YouTube announcement that would get emailed out to a list. Like, we don't need the media to share this anymore. And that shift has only gotten more pronounced as time has gone on. And that sort of cuts to that point that people don't need the website. You can get your information, and we all know now everybody's getting their information elsewhere and only wanting to read what they want to read because it confirms what they want to know. And that's a challenge that everybody's got to overcome. Let's see if I can share my screen for a minute, and I'll pull up signalcleveland.org, and then I'll show you the Marshall Project. But you will see what I was talking about in terms of that community news and the connection. And then we can talk just a bit about some of the stories we're doing and why we're doing them. And then I really want to get into questions. All right, so Ken, you help me out here to make sure I get this so that everybody can see it. I'm going to start with my screen. Let's see if I can share this, and you guys will see what's behind me. I know, I think I've got it here. So let's see. And let me move over to All right, so here's an example of some of the things that we do different. There's always pop-up ads about giving donations. We'll talk a little bit about our funding model in a moment. But one of the neighborhoods that we focus on is Central neighborhood in Cleveland, which it's a kind of a large area, but we're talking about an event that's going to happen for neighborhood kids at the St. Vincent's Hospital. So this, just basic information going on and things that, where the kids could go, the Friendly Inn, different places. The whole idea, again, the St. Vincent's annual Halloween event, you're not going to see this information in the other media. They're not focused on this. So that's a very deliberate thing by us. You will see things that we do, which will be very much tailored towards people. How to apply, get help on your gas bill. These examples right here, these utility assistance stories do really well. And again, I mean really well. I don't have to worry about doing it to get advertising or eyeballs, but we know what people are interacting with. And we create these, they get updated. And then we do something crazy. At times, we now actually print material and distribute it in the community, because part of what we're trying to do is meet people where they are. And sometimes they're not people who are digitally focused. So we've got to figure out ways to connect with people, how to apply for help, what do you need to know? So there is a real focus there. So this is a little bit more of the non-traditional side of journalism, but was also very much part of the model, very much part of what people wanted to fund when we created. So we're trying to do that. The documenters, again, is this group of Clevelanders that write briefs. And the idea is we also pay attention to the questions that are asked in public meetings. And we might actually, and we do often, stories just about what the public was asking at that public meeting. Because again, the idea had always been, well, it's not news till us news managers declare it's news, right? The idea now is to give more voice to people in the public. So I'm going to try to pull up here an example of some of the public meeting briefs. We have, here's how you can become a documenter. We have training sessions that take place every month or so. So here's just some of the examples of things we'll pull out. You can see going up, resident asked for community investment, not another jail. This was from a meeting where, of course, there's a lot of talk about a new county jail. We spent a lot of time talking about the County Diversion Center, which is a program that's supposed to take people that have had been charged with certain offenses, if there's an opportunity for rehabilitation versus just jail. But a lot of this is driven by the meetings that we're covering. We pay a lot of attention to public comment. So again, this is a little bit different than, go ahead.
That's my son.
That's your son, yes. Okay, so we've written about him. And I believe there's now the lawsuit on his behalf coming. So that is us. Now that is one element. If you want to go into more traditional news, we have quite a bit of stuff. One of our reporters covering government is Nick Castell, who joined us from public radio. He writes quite a bit, everything from financing of the public stadiums to, the impact of, the digital divide in Cleveland. He recently just profiled a new person who was hired to focus on the southeast neighborhoods of Cleveland. Again, you can see it. And then there's some traditional political news. Our K through 12 coverage. This is a sad reality of media here. There is no reporter in Cleveland dedicated to covering K through 12 in the city of Cleveland. Idea Stream comes closest with Connor Morris, who does a great job, but he's also covering multiple counties and districts everywhere. Plain Dealer does not have a K through 12 reporter dedicated to Cleveland. Our focus was that. We had a reporter who wrote a lot about students and parents and their voice. He came from a non-traditional background. He came from Teach from America. He was a documenter, became our K through 12 reporter, loved reporting so much he went to grad school to go back for reporting. So we've lost Paul, but we had a position where his stories stood out because they were focused on trying to be a bit different. We also have a K through 12, and I'm going to look back here and you can maybe see, I have to go back a ways to pull up some of those stories from earlier. Paul did things like looking at which schools students in Cleveland attend. Cleveland's open enrollment. I can live in any neighborhood and go to any school. He really took a deep dive at why that's happening and the challenges of that. and who gets to move and who doesn't. A lot of that came down to transportation issues. We did things, how do you choose a Cleveland school and an explainer? Again, pretty basic stuff that you're not going to find in traditional media. That was part of the focus, what we're doing. This week, we released on our site a documentary that we invested a lot of time in last year. We had heard about a very unique story that in one neighborhood in Cleveland, they did not have enough 12-year-olds to form a Cleveland Muni football team. Muni football is really big. So the coaches got together and said, well, let's combine 12-year-olds from two rival teams whose neighborhoods are also rivals in the real world and see what happens. And we followed them through the 2022 season and produced a film about it. That takes place largely in Central. That's East 55th and Kinsman. That's where a lot of the public housing, where the Stokes brothers came from. That was one team, the Renegades. And then Garden Valley, which is down Kinsman, the Falcons. Those two teams came together. I'm going to try to see to make sure if they can get audio. I'm going to play perhaps the trailer from that film, and you'll get a sense of, again, why we're different and what we're trying to do. Spending this kind of time will give you a flavor. Let me know if someone can't hear this. I don't know how the audio will play through. You stand up and give your team everything for everything that you want. So we're getting some feedback.
There's always been these rivalries between different projects.
Get a 5 United, because that became the name of the team, and that's the political boundary, Ward 5. You can see the entire film online now. Spoiler alert, you know, it didn't all go as planned, but I think that's just a reflection of the reality. And my point of all of this is that is the kind of attention we're trying to give to stories that are often getting ignored by the legacy and traditional media, of which I was a part of and still am, but looking for ways to go beyond that. I'm going to pull up the Marshall site just to give you a little sense of the stories. I mentioned some of those earlier, the bail reform. You can see the headlines here. Rachel DeSell is also an editor with us, so she works with the Marshall Project. That's part of that partnership and overlap. Again, we'll run some of their content. Mark Puente, a former colleague of mine from the Plain Dealers, written a series on Judge Celebrezze worth checking out quite a bit there. This is the story about the driver's license I mentioned. And you will see as we go on, they take a look at quite a bit of Cleveland specific stuff, but also with the larger idea. This was a good explainer. We ran this on our side and also has reporters from our team, how children end up in Cleveland's adult courts. It's a bind over issue that was done by Signal Cleveland and run on their site. So it goes back and forth. And this gets into a little bit, as you can see, how a wealthy Cleveland suburb profits from ticketing black drivers. That's Bratnall. So this is just an example of the kind of work that's being done by nonprofits in Cleveland. Signal Cleveland is supported right now by foundations, by individual donors, and we've had some sponsorship. That's very much the three pillars. If you think of public media, public radio, it's very similar. We're trying to find our space in that. And, you know, again, we're less than a year old, and it's challenging to say the least. But we are moving forward. And I feel like I'm in a place for the first time where I'm managing for the future, not the decline. I kept winding up, alternatives going down, you know, major newspapers managing for the decline. And don't let them kid you. There's no other explanation, because everywhere I've been, we have managed for how can we do more with less? How can we get smaller? And how can we keep saying we're still covering everything with way fewer reporters? That's managing for the decline. We're hoping to keep growing, and finally in a place where I'm managing with an eye towards the bigger future. So I want to take some questions. I'll try to answer anything on behalf of the Marshall Project the best I can. But I'll let Ken kind of lead the questions.
Yeah, please. Well, Mark, I thank you for coming, because what you've done is he's given us a perspective on legitimate news reporting as opposed to other types of.
There's still plenty of fake news out there, but
Yeah.
that's always going to be there.
Anyways, so we're transitioning to Q&A. If people want to ask a question, please raise your hand. And Marlene has a mic. For those that are on Zoom, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Please enter a question if you have one, and we will pick it up. Okay, Marlene.
Mark, thanks for your presentation. I'm a newspaper person, and so I have two concerns about the decline of newspapers. One, who's going to do the investigative reporting that newspapers do? And two, what will happen to newspaper archives, which are some of the best archives for research? In fact, all of the digital sites depend on newspaper archives in order to do background for their stories. So I'm worried about that. Thanks.
All right, I appreciate the question. Two parts there. Who's doing investigative reporting? What's the future of that? And what happens with the archives created? I can speak to both. Having been very involved in having concerns about both. There is less investigative reporting being done, period. And that's what I mentioned earlier. That takes time, costs a lot of money. The Plain Dealer at one time during the heyday had an investigative team, right? You may have kind of this vision and you think of the Washington Post, maybe you're thinking of the movie Spotlight, which was about the Spotlight team at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I recall that looked at the sex scandal in the Catholic Church. Those are stories that are the Boston Globe, sorry, probably owned by the same at some point. Those don't exist anymore. I think you've seen the space nationally filled by ProPublica, which has the top journalists in the country, period, hands down, and have done some of the most astounding work, and they try to give it away. I mean, they literally want people to run their stuff. I'm sometimes disappointed that it doesn't get picked up in more newspapers, but ProPublica is just, most recently did the series on Supreme Court Justice Thomas, where they spent, many, many, many months. You can read about how they did it, sending people all over the world to track down the information for it. Again, that's a huge investment that no economics support anymore at dailies. Television investigative reporting is thin. It usually involves small stuff, microphone and face getting some reaction. The Marshall Project does investigative reporting. That's largely what they do. These are big, longer piece stories. They're not covering things on a daily or weekly basis. I think you could tell you should check out the Marshall Project on Bracknell, what went into manually going through those tickets, because there was in trying to figure out the race of drivers, because Bracknell wasn't keeping track of that. So that kind of work is going on, but far, far less, because it's an economics thing. No one wants to waste time doing it. And I've done my own investigative reporting. I mean, all reporting should be investigative to a certain extent, but the taking on the bigger project takes time, whether it's using the data, resources. The computer age helps, but sometimes there is shoe leather that matters too, but that costs money. On the point of what happens to the archives, I often am trying to find my old stories, because I've written about a lot of topics, and sometimes I know something, but I just can't remember, and I Google it. There is a big chunk of my stories missing from Cleveland.com. They just didn't bother to archive them when they switched to Amazon servers back, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. I can go to the library and find them. You can go through Kent State. You've got access to stuff. I don't know how much has been digitized from the old microfilm. But yeah, there's a lot of stories not easily accessible, as you would think. They just didn't get cataloged because it cost money and somebody didn't want to do it. Cleveland State, has, I think, photo archives from the Cleveland Press. I can't remember what the Plain Dealer did. I know they just sold off a bunch of the assets. This is true. I believe some of my colleagues' press passes were kind of in the block of stuff they sold off, and somebody was selling somebody else's press pass on eBay. I mean, like it's out there. People did not keep this stuff. It was just an asset. So that can be depressing. Our material is archived, but I can't speak to everybody else's, other than I can't find certain stories that I did at the Plain Dealer. There's some years missing, and they go back to, I don't know, maybe it's 86. I can't remember how far back is online right now. Any other questions?
Just a reminder, please hold this close to your mouth and horizontal.
Thank you, Mark, for an excellent presentation. Two things. Number one, I'm glad I'm here because I've never heard of Signal Cleveland. I consider myself to be a news junkie, and I read international news and I don't read Cleveland stuff. I'm so glad I know about that site. Second of all, I was the lowest level of journalist. I was a stringer for Rittman Press, a chain of suburban papers. And I've always enjoyed seeing my name in print. I've had some photographs published in the Plain Dealer, and I don't get paid for that, and that's fine. I just like to see my name in print. I wonder why you don't have, in addition to city news of the Board of Education, et cetera, why you don't have, for example, high school sports. Nobody's covering that anymore. And surely there are stringers out there who would, after being vetted, would send a photograph and a capsule summary of 1 or 2 sentences of what happened in the game. It doesn't seem to be much personal news anymore. It's more Israel, Palestine, and so on and so forth, let alone what happened at the Bedford Maple football game. You know what I mean? So I'm just wondering why they haven't explored free labor or inexpensive labor to do things that would make papers more personable to people, and local news.
Yeah, there's a lot in your question and comment. I'll address just a couple of things that I can speak to. The Plain Dealer still covers high school football. People do like it. I think it is important. I would wish maybe someday that we even grow to a point at Signal Cleveland that we could give more attention to Cleveland sports, city sports, podcasts on Muni football. If you follow Instagram, check out Muni football. Like, it's huge. There's a lot there. It's a resource thing, still costs money. You know, the TV stations, I think, still do Friday night football after the 10 or 11 o'clock news because there's an appetite for it. Even with stringers, it's a cost function to have editors managing it, putting it together. Part of it is, though, in reality, people are getting all of that news in real time instantly. Kids are sharing it. You can see it. You can watch it. You know, the need for what is produced isn't there because so much happens in real time. I mean, there was a point, hard to imagine, that we used to look to the 11 o'clock news or the next morning paper to find out election results. I mean, it just, you know, election results are useless, right? The idea now is the minute the elections happen, you've got to be writing and thinking about what does it mean and where we go from here, because you already know everything in real time. So all of that contributes, in my opinion. You mentioned you were a stringer, very valuable. My very, very first job, as I was trying to transition into journalism, was got linked up with the New York Times to be a stringer for them after the Columbine shooting, because Dylan Klebold, one of the shooters, was from Toledo, and they needed someone to just drive out to the family's house and knock on the door. I had to do that, and I got a check from the New York Times. I think it was like $90, but the check said in the memo section, "Legs for Pam." So I was literally the legs for Pam Bullock. I think it was out of Chicago Bureau. That's how they did it. So footnote in journalism.
Thanks, a great presentation. I just wanted to talk about another area of news, the arts. I'm a theater critic for Scene, and for 25 years, in the past it was Three Times and Plain Dealer and so forth.
Yep.
But the arts are such a critical part, important part of Cleveland, because not only are our citizens going to the shows, they're also performing a lot of the shows. And I know that the Plain Dealer has stopped reviewing shows. And I was wondering if you see any future for that as far as Signal Cleveland is concerned, or somewhere else, because a lot of the theaters locally are struggling after the pandemic. Their subscription base has gone way down, and they're having a hard time, existing. So I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that.
A couple of things. Arts are critical. We wrote a story just 2 days ago about the recent report that came out about the economic impact of arts and culture in Cleveland. It's over $500 million. Took a deep dive on it. We are and have written some stories about the arts along the lines of race, equity, and the job and entrepreneur side of it. There has been interest, including from funders, that would like to see Signal Cleveland step more into the space of traditional arts coverage. But again, when we were kind of building ourselves up, we were looking at some baseline stuff. Obviously, the Plain Dealer still, through Steve Litt, covers a lot of the bigger picture stuff. I think it may have been Andrea Samakis is their last theater writer there. She's now out at Overland, I think, in their working in their public relations department. Very talented writer. I hate to see some of that go. My daughter's is a musical theater girl, so I get it. Economics probably drove that. And again, things are different. Part of it is the real time and what you can get elsewhere from people just posting about a show probably drove some of those decisions. At Signal Cleveland, we are exploring how we can connect with arts. I think you're going to see some of it pop. There is a Signal Akron launching with funds from the Knight Foundation, and I think they're looking at maybe in their startup looking at what opportunities are there within arts. But it's on the table for sure, and it's largely funding.
Hello, thank you for coming today. The documentaries, they seem really interesting to get the people involved, more and more people involved. And as you grow, have you considered maybe using any of the schools? The schools have, the reporting so they can promote, because the kids don't get recognized, right? So if they can get it out there and see that it's going to go somewhere, I think I just thought that might be great.
I appreciate the question, and I should give a little more attention to it. So I have a colleague that is managing editor of Community, Lawrence Caswell, who runs the Documenters program. What's interesting there is we have a greater demand of documenters than we have capacity to actually process the information and get people assigned, because it is a very formal process, because you just don't send somebody to a meeting, right? There's an orientation, the training, the set of notes. You got to have people that can edit them, manage it, get it up, and then actually do something with it. So we haven't had a problem of getting documenters. It's more the other way of like, we don't have the capacity yet to get more assigned, but connecting with students. And I think we've had a lot of college kids come through as a way to connect. I think our K-12 reporter, Paul, who left to go back to grad school, he started as a documenter. He's a Georgetown grad. So you got a range of people, but he was here in Cleveland looking to get into that side of things. And then we have, a core group that are in Cleveland that like it. But our problem is not having enough capacity to get people assigned. I think of meetings all the time I would like to go, but there's a real process to it, unfortunately.
I have a few things that I want to say. I'm a former journalism major, and I never did hard news like you, but playing on what Jack said, I always appreciated my name, my byline being there. I noticed that the documenters don't have bylines. Why is that?
Their notes do. If you go directly into the notes, you will see who did it. If usually there might be a documenter taking notes, there's also a documenter that will be assigned to maybe live tweet, basically just give some live version of it. That person's recognized. I think in this week's I haven't talked about it, but part of what we do is we have daily newsletters that go out. And there is one that I do called Weekly Chatter. It comes out on Saturdays. We have almost 11,000 subscribers. Usually I highlight one set of notes that didn't get noticed in other media. Usually we'll mention the documenter by name. There's a link directly into the notes, but you can find the documenters all have bylines and in the notes. And then if we're talking about their notes in a story, they're mentioned.
Do you find that fact checking is different with this than with other places you've worked?
I'm not sure how to fact checking our stories or documenters notes, or where we
All of the above?
All the above. Well, documenter notes take a long time to process because we are just trying to at least get formal titles down. If someone spoke and we didn't catch a name, someone will actually, if it was online, we'll maybe go back and try to listen to see if we can get clarification. But they are just notes, they're not stories, so we don't have to have it all answered. Our stories, like any other, I think, honest media, we do try to get our facts right. We fact check what we can. You have a couple of sets of eyes of editors that look at things, both for tone. We're not taking opinions. People might ascribe they always blame, they always say public radio is liberal. I think that they get that view because they may cover topics that are more liberal that are being ignored elsewhere, but they still have a decent filter in trying to make sure that what's presented. What they don't do, what we won't do, is what cable does, is give some Democrat or Republican 3 minutes of straight talking points. Like, that's not fact checking, that's not honest. So we're trying to put in some rules and things in place to make sure that information is accurate. And like everybody, we have a good, honest, transparent policy for corrections. You can read it on our site. we make mistakes. I mean, facts and figures that get messed up, but it gets corrected, put in. I take it very seriously, and so do the, reporters and other staff that work there.
I want to give a plug to you. I do subscribe to Signal Cleveland and the Marshall Project. I get things every day, sometimes more than once a day.
Yeah.
Um,
Apologize for that.
And no, it's fine. And I enjoy it. And one of the things that I enjoy about what Signal Cleveland sends is that it includes videos. And I think it's the only one that I subscribe to that regularly does that. So I really do appreciate that. Also, for the benefit of the people here who are UUCC members, last week we had a collection plate that is being donated to the Marshall Project, and next week we have one that is being donated to Signal Cleveland. So, the saying, give generously as you can.
Thank you. We do appreciate it, and we, I take it seriously. Every dollar that someone gives should be spent well if we can on news and documenters and other things.
Yeah.
You'd be impressed with our very modest offices. It's not being spent on furniture.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Is it possible to actually make a living in journalism these days if you're not working for a first top level paper like the New York Times? And our children or young people going into journalism in college now?
A lot there. A lot of it's going to depend on what your view of making a living. No, it's not easy. I mean, that's part of why there's not more people in it. The alternative newspapers don't pay well. I mean, period. They still don't. Scene doesn't, and that's part of the economic model. When I was 30 years old, living in Philadelphia, 1997, you can adjust for inflation, I made $30,000. Could not afford a car. I rode my bike to City Hall, covered it. The Plain Dealer was a big jump up because it was a union shop and the scale was there. Signal Cleveland has tried to evaluate what the market is and try to be somewhere there and slightly ahead. I've made a living doing it, been lucky to do it, and Plain Dealer was the best paid place I've been at. For part of that, just landing there during the heyday. And television's a different economic model. They do have a higher scale, but you work year to year in television. Your contract is renewed every year. If they don't want you, you can go. They can tell you to go. So there's a stability issue that's tougher in TV. And we're a nonprofit, so we are trying to raise money. Our runway isn't 5 years out, right? We're kind of working on a tighter cycle. So the answer is you can. On the part about college, my wife is a college professor in journalism at Kent State. We do see some declining in enrollment, but there are a lot of jobs in media, not necessarily news, right, traditional sense, because there's so much to do on the digital realm. And organizations are running their own sort of news versions. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but like if you're nonprofits, they want people that are savvy in media and news. And so some people are being trained up through the journalism schools and that, as well as there are a lot of online only digital news organizations out there that graduates are landing jobs in. But the difference is there isn't as many that are going into journalism looking to get at the big daily, because the big daily really doesn't exist. I mean, your New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, that level still exists in some push for that, but that's just such an anomaly.
Any more questions?
Okay. Before I ask everyone to thank Mark again for doing this, does Signal Cleveland have an app that you could put on your to click on?
No, excuse me. We get that and some of us would like it because that's how people
Yeah.
got used to it, but that's a fairly substantial cost right now that we're not taking on. We do text messages that might alert you to a story. And right now we're using our email or our newsletter lists at times to say, hey, check this out. But the app is not there. It just gets us into
Well,
a different area.
Jack mentioned that he hadn't heard of Signal Cleveland, and I hadn't until I started putting this forum together. But for those who aren't acquainted, if you idea stream with like Mike McIntyre, Mark's articles sound just like what you hear on WVIC idea stream. I mean, they're well written. I recommend you go to the site and read, because I did read some of your work. So, with that having been said, I want to thank Mark again and our audiences, both here and online, for as closing remarks. Now, the next two items I'm going to mention are paired, okay? But you have to sign up, you have to register through our forum section at uucleveland.org. And what it has to do with, on Monday, October 30th, from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m., we're going to have a discussion of a book called Relinquished, where mothers give up their children. You know, they really can't get an abortion, is what it comes down to, and they're willing to give up their children. So, I mean, I think it's tragic and it should be looked at. This is on Monday, October 30th, from 7:30 to 9 p.m.
That's
And
the
that's-
Zoom.
Excuse me.
That's the Zoom.
That's
It's
the
not an
Zoom. That is
in-person-
Zoom.
It's not an
Okay.
in-person discussion.
Yeah, it's Zoom, so you have to sign up for it. Plus, you have to, we'd like you to sign up for an in-person item, which is November 5th at 11:30 a.m. here. And we're going to have a continuation of that with Betsy Norris. She's the CEO of Adoption Network Cleveland. She'll be here in-house and speaking to anyone that has a question. So I encourage you to sign up for that. Again, it's at our forum site for uucleveland.org. Okay. Now, this is important. People should pay attention to this. We have the Inflation Reduction Act. It has to deal with energy savings. And our current administration has bent a few arms to get that act through. But anyways, on November 5th at 9 a.m. here in the House, we're going to have two guests. One is Alberto Alex. He's a lead LEED architect, and he's with Alex Consulting. Another person is Martin Berry. He's a certified energy auditor, and he'll also be here. And it'll actually save you money in terms of energy consumption and what you can do with your own home. And finally, I would like to invite everyone here or online to our Sunday service. We will have speakers from our congregation. The topic is spirituality of queerness. So to see what else is happening, please log in to our website. Again, www.cleveland.org. And again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
I appreciate the chance to.
Thank you.
Might be yours.